This is a topic I'm going to cover in quite a few recordings, simply because there seems to be no end to the list of nonsense that we were all led to believe. And this was all told to us by Cecilia, and ultimately we all believed it because of the vast amounts of evidence and the extremes that Cecilia went to in order to make all of us believe it. So basically, who is Cecilia Steyn, or who did she claim to be? Now, Cecilia said to us that her birth was prophesied about many, many, many years ago, where her parents, being her father and her mother obviously, would conceive her on an occult ritual table in the middle of an occult ritual, to where she would then be born and then be raised in the occult ways, having learnt occult abilities and also having inherited occult abilities, to then when she will finally reach the age where she will have the ability and the full knowledge and at the exact right timing, she would open the gates of hell on earth. And basically everything that is being withheld in hell would be unleashed onto the earth. Apparently, the age, or approximately the age that Cecilia was supposed to have done this, was just a few months before I had met her. Because when she was supposed to do this, when she was supposed to open the gates of hell, she decided she wanted to leave the occult. And this is basically where her escape began. And this is where her running for her life started. And this is pretty much why the occult kept wanting to get Cecilia back, and if not, then kill her. She had this extreme responsibility. She was the only one in the entire world who was able to do this, and it was prophesied about many, many, many years ago. And so much so that her bloodline apparently led all the way back to Ramses, because all magic starts from Egypt. So everything Egyptian related, including Cecilia's ways, some of her DID parts names, some of Cecilia's abilities, her vast extensive knowledge, was very Egyptian based. Now, to backtrack a little, the father that Cecilia was talking about is the same father that you have seen publicized in the media. But the mother that Cecilia was referring to is not the same mother who has been publicized in the media. The mother who is in the media was supposedly Cecilia's stepmother, her father's wife. Cecilia's supposed biological mother was someone else. This mother apparently was killed in Cecilia's place because Cecilia would not return to the occult. So as a threat and as a replacement on Halloween, a few months before I had met Cecilia, her mother was killed. Now, because Cecilia's supposed role was so vitally important to the occult, and the occult's supposed desperate need for her to return, the supposed threats were extreme. So the occult would supposedly go to extreme measures in order to punish Cecilia, in order to get her to come back to the occult. So they would then stop punishing her, basically. And with regards to the biological mother, the occult's supposed extreme punishment for Cecilia not returning to them for the Halloween just a few months prior to me meeting Cecilia was to crucify. And yes, Cecilia said her mother was crucified on a cross, upside down, on Halloween night in Cecilia's place, because Cecilia would not return to the occult. The occult had apparently captured her mother. Her mother had managed to write a letter goodbye and give instructions as to what Cecilia was to do after the mother's death. The mother was also tortured and in various ways before the actual Halloween day, before the actual death scenario, to where she was ultimately, supposedly, crucified. Now, just to add, this biological mother is actually not Cecilia's biological mother. The mother who is in the media is actually Cecilia's biological mother. But none of us knew the truth of all of this until all these years later. We were all under the belief about the pretense of this other woman who was Cecilia's mother. And this supposed biological mother had many abilities. She was an exceptionally strong witch. She had a werewolf bloodline, to which she then passed on to Cecilia. And with every generation, the werewolf bloodline gets stronger, apparently. So Cecilia was then stronger than her mother, and therefore Cecilia's daughter would ultimately then become stronger than Cecilia. But now going back to when Cecilia was born by this supposed biological mother, as soon as she was born, she was taken away by her father, to where he then raised her, along with the supposed stepmother. Apparently Cecilia was born premature. Apparently she was born small enough to even fit into a shoebox. And apparently that's also where she slept, inside of a shoebox, because that's how her father treated her. And since she was born, her father continuously, apparently, had abused her in the most heinous of ways. He apparently even had a specific set-aside room in his house filled with torture equipment, where he would torture Cecilia. And the room was walled off or padded, so much so that when Cecilia would scream, no one could hear her outside of that room. There were even scenarios related where her father would tie her up on chains hanging from the ceiling, and he would torture her with tasers, and he would torture her until it was too much and she would pass out. And then he would revive her again, and he would carry on torturing her. And this is how that kind of scenario would repeat itself. And apparently it was a very common one, something that happened often during Cecilia's lifetime as she grew up. Her father continuously abused her and tortured her in the most heinous of ways. And with the supposed biological mother, Cecilia was basically never allowed to see her, because her biological mother apparently was very soft-hearted. She was gentle in nature, where her father was made out to be this extremely dark, sadistic, and twisted man. And he would go to any extreme to keep Cecilia away from her mother, because Cecilia's supposed biological mother would always try and rescue her. She would always supposedly try save her from whatever abuse Cecilia would go through. Now to backtrack a little further again, with also regards to DID. Apparently, the DID part Anya was formed while Cecilia's apparently biological mother was still pregnant with her. Apparently, while the biological mother was still pregnant, he inflicted some kind of torture, some kind of pain onto the baby, or fetus, if you will. And it was so extensive that even while Cecilia was still unborn, the torture was that bad that she already split and she developed DID before she was even born, and thus creating Anya. Anya held everything, or was supposed to hold everything that was good and pure in Cecilia. Anya was supposed to be basically all the good that could ever come or be of Cecilia, or be from Cecilia, was set aside into a 3-year-old little DID part, to where the rest of who Cecilia is, and to the rest of Cecilia's supposed DID parts, they would be dark and twisted and sadistic, perfectly fitting into the occult ways, apparently. And after Cecilia was born, as her father apparently carried on torturing her and punishing her in the most gruesome of ways for no apparent reason at all, Cecilia carried on developing DID, splitting off into countless DID parts. And while this started happening, and as this started happening, with her father's apparent extensive knowledge of occult ways and DID itself, he then managed to split those DID parts into 4 separate systems. Now, when a person develops DID, it is naturally called a system because there is an array of parts, there is a collection, there is a system. But there is generally only one system. But in the occult, apparently you can split it off into numerous systems for various reasons. Each system, each collection of parts would have a responsibility, would have a set way of doing things. They would be divided for specific reasons. And Cecilia apparently had 4 different systems, which would all then have 4 separate ways of being, 4 reasons for existing. One system would encompass a lot of vampires, for example, whereas other systems would not. They would be more werewolf related, or another system would be more supposed ability based for other things. They were all extensively different. And as Cecilia's father supposedly abused her and structured the DID system and systems into whichever way he wanted, he apparently had also frozen a number of her parts in time. He had literally stopped time for a number of these parts. So, to explain this a bit further, basically, when those DID parts, endured certain types of torture, certain types of brainwashing and control, he froze those parts into that time period so that they could no longer see that time has passed, so that they could no longer see that the torture and punishment and the control is over. They were still stuck back in that moment, basically for the rest of Cecilia's life. So they were still stuck in thinking they were being victimized and abused. They were still stuck in thinking they were being controlled and told what to do. There was no way out of it. So this is how they had to function, with no way of moving forward in a future tense. And with every one of these DID parts that supposedly split off of Cecilia, they were all occult related, they all encompassed occult abilities, and they were all very, very dedicated to the occult. The only DID part that was set aside from all of them was Anya, because there was not one dot of evil or for a lack of a better word, or for I'm using really bad English right now, but there was no way of any badness in Anya. Anya was pure, she was innocent, she was also victimized continuously. And Anya was also Cecilia's father's supposed primary target. If he couldn't get to Cecilia, he would then torture Anya by a very long topic, which I will also cover in another audio. But in a nutshell, her father would somehow manage to pull Anya out of Cecilia's body as an astral, to then take her to another place, to then put her inside someone else's body, to then inflict punishment to where Anya would feel every ounce of pain. This type of scenario was an extremely common scenario. It was every few days. It was, if not every day to every second day, type of scenario where Anya was being punished or abused in some way by Cecilia's father. And it would then affect Cecilia in some way or other, because Anya was part of Cecilia. But now, as Cecilia grew up from birth, basically, and aside from DID, her father would train her in occult ways. That was also the reason for the abuse. But he would educate her in occult practices, in occult ways. And even as young as at the age of 3, Cecilia had to commit her first murder. She was, like I had mentioned previously with regards to animals, Cecilia was given an animal where she became extremely close and attached to this animal, and then she was instructed to kill it, and she apparently did. That was the first time Cecilia had apparently murdered, at 3 years old. And after this, it became basically a normal thing for her to carry on doing by the occult's supposed instruction throughout the rest of her life. And that would be regarding animals, children, babies, and adults, for various reasons, any reasons, even if it was not for occult rituals. There was always some twisted reason for her having been instructed to kill something or someone. So basically, Cecilia being able to kill was no more, it was just as normal for her as breathing. It was second nature to her, because she had apparently started and done this since 3 years old. And even as Cecilia grew up, her group of friends, outside of her family, her direct family, had to be friends that were in the occult. Those were the only people she was allowed to socialize with. The other occult friends, the other occult people's children, basically. All the children who were born and raised in the occult attended the same school and socialized in the same groups. There was no outsider that was really allowed into their lives. This is what their life was supposed to be like, completely and solely dedicated to everything occult related, and that was teachings and socializing and family. It was a constant non-stop thing in every direction and in every way. They were, well, she was apparently completely drenched in everything regarding the occult. But now, even though the apparent involvement with the occult was so extreme, to keep face or still look innocent for the rest of society, in order to blend in with the rest of the world, apparently Cecilia's father would still take her to a Catholic church every Sunday because basically that was the norm. Everybody, or most people in society, go to church, at least back then, every Sunday to some kind of religious church, but in specific, it was a Catholic church. And even to the extent where Cecilia would have to wear a crucifix around her neck, and apparently all the other occult children as well. They would all have to blend in to look like they were Catholic. And if anyone ever asked them, they would say they are Catholic. There were various reasons, all of which are extremely insulting, for why Cecilia had to claim to be Catholic at the end of the day, which I will get to in another audio. But like I said, it's extremely insulting. So I'll definitely rather cover that in another topic. But she had to pretend to follow Catholic ways. She had to even read and memorize the Bible, scripture by scripture, even quoting it verse by verse, even with the scripture reference, since she was a child. This is how she was raised. But at the same time, she also had to read the Satanic Bible. And also in the same way, she had to read it verse by verse to be able to quote it verse by verse. And all of which she was fed to believe that everything that was in the Bible was a complete lie. In the Christian Bible, that it was all a complete lie. And that everything in the Satanic Bible was the actual truth. So the reason for her having read the Christian Bible was to know what the lies are, basically, and also to blend in with the rest of society to look innocent. And on this point, I can pretty much and honestly believe that Cecilia had memorized the Bible from cover to cover, because at any given moment she could quote the Bible scripture by scripture with the exact right reference, not one word out of place. It was honestly the weirdest thing, because at any given moment, and one after the other, she could quote scripture by scripture without hesitation, without stumbling upon references or words or getting anything wrong. It was done perfectly. It was almost as if she was reading the Bible out aloud. That's how well she did it at any given moment when I knew her. But even though she was supposedly occult raised, she had to appear Christian raised, more so Catholic raised. And if anyone had to ever ask her a question regarding anything regarding the Christian belief, her answers could only be yes or no, because then that would not defy or go against any occult beliefs and practices. And if she ever had to say anything more than a yes or no, the demons that were on the inside of her, or apparently on the inside of her, would then inflict punishment onto her. So, for example, if someone had to ask her, do you believe that Jesus Christ died and then rose again? All she could do was say yes. And then there would be no dire consequences with regards to demon pain infliction and anything else. But if she had to verbalize herself, the actual words, word for word, that I believe that Jesus Christ died and was raised again to life, she would then have the results of demons taking over and punishing her. So with the way she was raised, all it could ever be is a yes or a no. And it's actually, as she said, and she got all of us to believe how easy it is to fool anybody into believing that you believe something just because you said yes or no. A simple yes or no did not honestly mean that you honestly believed something. in order for anyone in the occult to truly confess their true beliefs, they actually had to word out the exact sentences word for word, because a yes or no meant nothing. And added to what I just mentioned now with regards to the demons on the inside of Cecilia, she claimed that since she was born, alongside with the abuse that her father inflicted on her through the occult rituals and so on, she had demons placed on the inside of her. Her father or the occult would summon demons to where they would take possession of her body, to where they would then control her for whatever purpose, to where they would then keep her in line with occult ways. And as she grew up, and especially with regards to occult rituals and occult practices, and where she would practice her supposed occult abilities, she would then herself summon demons in order to take possession of her body, so she could then inherit these abilities to do whatever it was she wanted to do. All of this was basically and purely aimed at Cecilia eventually opening the gates of hell. She had to be raised and trained to become the strongest in the world with anything occult related, anything occult ability related, and the most knowledgeable, to where she would also, and was also, eventually married to Satan. She never mentioned at what age, but at some age in her life, I have a feeling, as far as memory serves for all the information that she had told us, I think it was around the age of 13, because at the age of 13, that's when most things apparently start taking place. Most turning points happen, most dramatic life scenarios. So at the age of 13, perhaps, that's when she was married to Satan, where the occult held a ritual. They summoned demons to where they ultimately summoned Satan himself, to where he appeared. Cecilia said her marriage vows, to where Satan then had sex with Cecilia on an occult ritual table in the middle of an occult ritual, then confirming their relationship, their marriage. They became unified. She became the bride of Satan, which then also ultimately gave her more leeway and more reason to eventually open the gates of hell on earth, because she was the bride of Satan.